Hell
hot.
is bad for you. It's bad for your health. Okay. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Liberator podcast. This is episode 40 of the Liberator podcast. I'm here with James Silberman, as always, myself, Sam Riley, and we have no Russell this week. He is recovering from an abolitionist conference that happened in North Carolina just this weekend.
It was very encouraging to watch from afar. We weren't there, but just seeing how many people were there and how much lit they were passing out. They are doing some really good work out in North Carolina, so that was very encouraging to see. Supporting that bill that they're supporting.
Yeah, for sure.
158. So,
and we have a hugely important episode this week too. We're going to be talking about pro-life rhetoric and the flaws with pro-life rhetoric.
Yeah. Words are important. The words we choose matter. Words direct conversations. Words shift culture. Words are what direct the flow of ideas. And so we've got to get this right. And the pro-life movement gets it really, really, really wrong. And so we are going to talk all about that.
Yep.
So let's get into it.
Yep. So the first thing is, I think this video is a really, really good starting place for our discussion today. It is a look into the mind of pro-life rhetoricians when they come up with what they're doing, the motivation behind why their rhetoric is so weak. So let's just take a look at this, and I think is really informative.
Yeah. So this is a video from Students for Life with a Susan B. Anthony List kind of political strategist as the featured person. And yeah, like Sam said, this just sets the table for all the things we're going to talk about: how pro-life language is soft, how it treats abortion like healthcare, how it distracts from the actual issue that matters that we should be talking about. This video explains why that they do the things they do, make the decisions they make. So
this is Mallory Quigley.
Yes.
In Washington and in state legislatures across the country, pro-life momentum is surging. Pro-life candidates, legislators, and policymakers are going on offense to expose abortion extremism. They're enacting and strengthening policies that protect unborn babies and their moms. Today, life is seen as a winning issue for pro-life candidates, but it wasn't always viewed this way. Candidates and legislators, even true believers, would avoid the issue, crossing their fingers and hoping abortion wouldn't come up in a debate, fearful of taking a stand. But the pro-life movement demanded better. We knew that not only is our position morally right, it is also politically smart. Flipping the script to expose the extremists who support abortion on demand without limits, up until the moment of birth, paid for by taxpayers like you and me, is a winning message. This message unites Americans of all stripes behind compassionate, common sense limits on abortion and increases respect for the dignity of all human life. We urged our candidates to be courageous, to boldly speak truth, to love the unborn.
Yikes.
Yeah. Okay. So we paused there. So she talks about boldly speaking truth.
Yeah.
But everything that she said up to that point was the opposite of boldly speaking truth, right? Yeah. How they train legislators to speak is to not boldly say life begins at conception. Abortion is the violent murder of an image bearer of God. That's not how they coach them to speak boldly. They coach them to say things like, well, the Democrats are really, really bad on this and they support abortion up till birth. Yeah. So what about
extremists?
Extremists. So what about just like a reasonable, moderate 20-week abortion ban, or the woman should at least, have to look at an ultrasound or hear the heartbeat first. That's not boldly speaking the truth.
Yeah.
So boldly speaking the truth is good, but that's not what they're teaching their legislators to do, and it's not what they're even doing themselves, as we'll get into later in the show.
Yeah, I think the thing that jumps out at me in the first part of that video is the common sense abortion restrictions. It's like if you're talking about homicide, a genocide of human beings, the only common sense thing to do with that is to abolish it and to establish justice and to not allow for anyone to be killed. Yeah. And when you actually orient all your rhetoric around building a bigger crowd of people to get in more restrictions, to get rid of more abortion, what you're doing is you're diluting it. You're making it weaker so that people are actually, if you switch it later on, if you change it to we need to abolish abortion, all those people who are in that camp are just going to leave because they came in with the understanding, oh, we're just trying to common sense restrictions for abortion. We're not actually trying to abolish abortion. This is what this is what it means to be pro-life. I think that's why you get 48% of pro-life people who identify as pro-life who don't think abortion should be criminalized. Like there's 48% of the people in this country are pro-life.
And 12% want abortion completely abolished.
Yeah.
And so that means that 1 in 4 pro-lifers wants abortion completely abolished. And the reason is exactly like you said. The pro-life movement's messaging is all about regulate abortion. Just be common sense moderates. That is the pro-life message. Now, does that help a certain candidate win a certain campaign? Sure, that can help a certain candidate win a certain campaign. Can that shift culture? Can being a common sense moderate destroy a culture of death? Being a common sense moderate, that's absurd.
Yeah, I say because I'm following you, not because, yes, that's the thing that does it.
Yeah, it's a very short-sighted view that says, man, how can I just win one election? How can I, try to seem like a moderate? That's how political strategists think, but that's not how people who actually shift the culture think.
Yeah, and this is when she says this is they have made life a winning issue now. What she's referring to is basically getting more European restrictions for abortion, which is a very pro-choice culture, right? It's a culture that is, they have more restrictions than we do in America, but that's the winning thing, is to get a culture that has, right now, more restrictions than we currently have, and that's the aim and the goal of this rhetoric, eventually with a motivation of abolishing abortion. But again, you're delaying that by not calling for it immediately and having this sort of euphemistic type of rhetoric.
And every member of the human family. We ask them to prepare, to be ready to demonstrate their pro-life commitments, and to call out radical policies that fly in the face of our nation's values. Respect for life deserves as much attention as any other issue we debate in the political realm, be it foreign policy, the economy, healthcare. The message is clear.
As much? Really?
Yeah.
Abortion deserves as much attention as anything else?
Yeah.
Are you freaking kidding me?
Radical extremists, whenever you're referring to abortion supporters as those things, it came up all the time with the New York abortion laws, the late-term abortion laws as well.
You wrote an article in this. I think you were about to say it. But
yeah. I wrote an article for the Federalists about this, but every single pro-life leader was using this kind of extremist radicals about abortion supporters who believe that it was okay to murder a baby at 9 months as opposed to earlier on. And the problem with that is that it makes it so that somehow it's more bearable and more understandable to murder a baby if they're 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 16 weeks than it is to murder a baby that is fully developed in the womb. And that's essentially just buying into the developmental view that the abortion advocates take on. They believe that you become more human the more you develop. And that's wrong. But that's what pro-life rhetoric essentially does, is it makes it, and in a lot of ways it implicitly makes it so that it's more acceptable and less extreme to murder babies who are younger.
And that's not to say that you can't call out like Northam in Virginia and Cuomo in New York when they put forward these really, really evil, or they sign into law these evil abortion laws that allow abortion up to birth. You can call that out. That's fine. But you've got to do it in a way that doesn't make late-term abortions seem like they're this awful thing and not, raise a peep about the early-term abortion, because then you are training people to get more upset the later the baby is, and that is devaluing the early-term baby. So you can still call it out. You can say this law is absolutely evil, it's murderous, it's bloodthirsty, do all those things, but don't make it about that. You've got to keep the main thing. And like you said, and I would encourage people to go to read Sam's article in The Federalist. It was really, really good. But yeah, you've got to keep the main thing the main thing. You can't get people all angry about things that are tangential to what actually needs to be talked about, which is that abortion is murder. Always, and not be partial about which babies matter more. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the fact that she's saying abortion deserves as much attention and as much time being talked about as foreign policy or economics, whatever other issues, that's crazy. Like it's a Holocaust. What are you talking about? It deserves as much attention. This is the issue. This is it. We live in a Holocaust. Like is people being able to make a living important? Yes, we should try to implement policies where that leads to a flourishing economy. That's good. But to have the advocates of this issue for them, their attitude toward it to be, well, this deserves as much attention as anything else. Mm-hmm. No, it's the issue. It's a Holocaust. And you need to speak about it as if it's one if you want the politicians to act as if it's one.
And if a movement spends 20 years using the best, like having the best demands for exactly what they want, over the years, they might get half of what they're asking for. They might get another half of what they're asking for. Like the government is going to concede. People are going to come along, and those concessions are going to be not the whole thing. But when you're asking for so little, what you're getting half of is basically nothing.
Right.
And that's exactly what pro-life rhetoric does. It asks for so little that the actual rewards that you're getting are not even to be mentioned. They're of no consequence. And that's what we see from a lot of the pro-life movement.
Yeah, and one other point on this before we move on in the video, it's interesting. So when we call for prior to abolitionists coming on the scene, like a 20-week ban or like a heartbeat bill, these were like the radical pro-life stuff. Like you're a hardcore pro-lifer if you do this. Mm-hmm. And that was the extreme. And then we shifted what it even means to be against abortion. And so now it's like, man, if you don't support the heartbeat bill, you're not even a pro-lifer.
Yeah.
And so we've actually, by making our bold stand, we've forced everyone towards us. Now they're not all the way towards us where they need to be. They're not with us, but we're forcing them towards us. Mm-hmm. And that's because we think long term. How do you shift culture? How do you shift the way people think about an issue? Well, it's by making a firm, strong, biblical, constitutional demand.
Yeah.
Demand, not a request, demand.
Yeah.
And you demand it repeatedly and actually boldly, not like #courage, ban abortion at 20 weeks and make the mom listen to a heartbeat and look at an ultrasound. That's not courage.
Yeah.
No. Be courageous, pull the culture towards you. Yeah. And that's actually made what used to be extreme pro-lifeism what you just have to be.
Yeah, and it's not like we're playing bad cop, good cop with them or anything like that, but that's essentially what's happening, is that we're asking for something that's consistent, that's righteous, that's good, that is in line with the truth. And when we do that, people that are moderates, people that are seen as moderates by the legislators, by the people, their policies, what they're asking for is just going to be much more easily to get,
right?
Because there is that group of people that is asking for exactly what we want. So even though pro-lifers, most of them hate us, they shouldn't hate us because it makes it way easier on them.
Yeah, your bills are passing like crazy in a lot of states to a significant degree because abolitionists are shifting the Overton window in that state. We're shifting the entire political scene in that state. And that's why you've got 5 bills passing in Oklahoma this year. 6 if you count the adoption bill. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why you got 12 bills passing out of one committee in Texas in a single day. Mm-hmm. It's because abolitionists are making them look like weak moderates, and they've got to prove that they're not. And so they try to do the more radical pro-life stuff. Yeah. And so, it's largely because of us that a lot of these bills are passing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Don't be afraid to go on offense. There is no more critical time than now to devote everything we have to the protection of the unborn. Sadly, the Democratic Party has been taken over by pro-abortion radicals. The party that once stood for the little guy has abandoned the unborn and vulnerable women.
Oh,
what?
I don't know.
What is even her point there? Once stood for the little guy?
Yeah.
When did the Democratic Party stand for the little guy?
I think, this is the kind of pandering we're talking about. It's like you got to build a big tent, and so you just pander as hard as you possibly can. I don't know what fictional Democratic Party she's talking about here, but obviously it's just to appeal to leftists, and for some reason they think that this is going to be a convincing pitch. Like if we just compliment you, if we flatter you, if we try to get you to think, oh yes, now we are the ones for equality because we're using that word and stuff like that. We'll use your buzzwords or whatever. And equalities, that's a fine word. Whatever. There's nothing wrong with the word equality, but the pandering is the whole idea here. That's like the strategy. It's like we have to be soft. We have to build this big tent. And then she's even saying things like, if you boldly advocate for truth. But that's not what she's doing. Yeah. Like she is doing the exact opposite in everything she's saying here, but acting like somehow she's advocating for the truth.
Yep.
First, it became the party of safe, legal, and rare. But now they've dropped that mask as well.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And who has become the party of safe, legal, and rare?
Yeah.
Right. The Republican Party has become the party of safe, legal, and rare.
Yeah.
And as we'll get into it, later in this episode, the Republican Party is literally, and a lot of the pro-life organizations literally treat abortion like healthcare, and they speak about regulating it as if it were healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's how you cement in people's minds the fact that it is healthcare. And that's the fruit of not keeping the main thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Republican Party is basically the party right now of safe, legal, and rare abortion. Just make it a little bit safer and a little bit rarer.
Yeah. And it is a dramatic shift, cultural shift, that the mainstream pro-life organizations are advocating for what she said, the Democratic Party's old stance.
Yep.
Like, she is trying to say common sense abortion restrictions. That's the thing that she said throughout all this video, and this is how they're building their big tent. This is how they're getting life to be a winning issue again. It's really not making it a winning issue at all. She is just making it so that more people who are nowhere near consistent on this are actually coming in and believing what she's saying. But what she's saying isn't going to do any good for preborn babies.
What she means by winning issue is very important. It doesn't mean that we're actually creating a culture where there's more people who think abortion's murder and ought to be abolished. When she says abortion's a winning issue, she means the Republicans feel more comfortable speaking about it and running on a pro-life platform. That's what she means by a winning issue. And so, does that help pro-life Republicans get elected? Absolutely. Does that get us closer to abolishing abortion? Not necessarily. In some cases, it actually hinders us from being able to abolish abortion.
And that's how they measure their success as well. It's like, if people agree that there should be restrictions on abortion, they sort of count those as pro-lifers. I remember Students for Life, it's probably 2 years ago, they sent out an email about a student who had changed their mind. And their basis for saying that they changed their mind was they went from saying that all abortion was acceptable to saying that they believed that there should be some restrictions on abortion afterwards. And so that's how they were counting mind changes. Other organizations aren't like that. They don't believe that. They're like, created equal. If they count a mind change, that means the person went from believing abortion was acceptable in any case to believing it's always unacceptable. But people like Mallory Quigley here, I think that's the standard they're operating from. It's people who will accept some kinds of restrictions.
That's what it means to be a pro-lifer, to think that abortion should be regulated to a certain degree. To what degree doesn't really matter, but if you think abortion, if you're not an extremist, then you're a pro-lifer. And that's the strategy. Get people to identify with the movement without believing that abortion is even the killing of an image bearer of God or even a human being. It's a very short-sighted strategy, this entire thing.
Yeah.
In exchange for cash from Planned Parenthood and the rest of the abortion lobby, they've become the party of death, promoting painful late-term abortions on demand up until the moment of birth, and now even advocating infanticide. For years, the pro-life movement has sought to shed light on the extreme position of our opponents. But today, thanks to Governor Cuomo in New York, Delegate Kathy Tran, and Governor Northam in Virginia, we have them in their own words, and the majority of Americans don't like it. Thanks to a pro-life president in the White House, we've seen an unprecedented number of life-affirming policies advanced. Planned Parenthood has been defunded of more than $60 million in Title X funding.
Yeah, but they also went up in all their other funding.
Yeah.
I mean, under Trump, Planned Parenthood funding went up, and even though the Title X thing got cut off from that, their overall funding still increased from the federal government, even though you had a majority, at least for Trump's first 2 years, you had Republican president, you had Republican Senate, and you had Republican House for Trump's for 2017 through 2019. And yet, Planned Parenthood got more money than ever.
Yeah.
Right? But you've made life a winning issue. But what does that mean? It means you've got Republicans who don't do anything. It means you've created a thing where they can say I'm pro-life and get elected on that platform, but not care a rip about preborn children, not care a single bit. And that is the fruit of this strategy of compromise in big tent and just trying to paint the other side as extremists and us as moderates. You're going to get moderates who don't care about the issue. That's what this creates.
And it just goes to show exactly what happens, the fruit of having such horrible demands. Because as soon as you get a candidate who will give you any attention, like will invite you to the White House, or like President Trump, he had Kristen Hawkins in to as an advisor. That amount of attention is seen as enough for them a lot of the times. Like they're they've become shills for certain candidates because they'll give them any amount of attention and they'll run all this cover for them when they should be the ones making the demand and saying that's not enough.
Right. Their standards are so low. Like Trump speaks at March for Life, and it's like this is the greatest thing that's ever happened in the history of the abortion battle.
The most pro-life president ever.
Yeah, it's like, man, that's enough to get you to be all in for this guy like that, really? But yes, it's very low standards because they're short-sighted. They're not trying to play the long game of shifting culture. They're trying to win certain elections. Yeah. And this can win you an election, but it's not going to get you anywhere in the battle.
Yeah, so I think we've seen enough from this video just to get a basic understanding of what they're trying to do with their rhetoric. Now, I think that pro-life rhetoric falls into a couple of different categories, and we can go through these. There's a bunch of examples that we've gathered.
So now we have an understanding of kind of why that they are soft and why they kind of treat abortion like healthcare and only go for common sense, moderate regulations and that sort of stuff. But even just like the most commonly used pro-life catchphrases or terms, they're not designed to create the idea in the hearer's mind that abortion is murder, that it's the violent killing of a human being or anything like that. They're meant to be very kind of happy, upbeat, sort of thing, and that's the strategy because you're trying to appeal to the mushy middle or trying to make the other side look extreme. And so the the terms are pro-life, choose life, love them both, stuff like that. That who could ever in their right minds object to pro-life or choose life, right? But you're not speaking about abortion in a way that at all captures the gravity of the issue. You're not creating a conversation about whether or not abortion's murder. You're creating a conversation about whether or not we need to help the mom choose life, or whether or not we need to be some vaguely pro-life thing. We're not saying we're calling for anything to be abolished. We're just saying that we support life. And again, it's because they're not trying to create the conversation that needs to be created. They're just trying to appear very happy and not this kind of overbearing, where your moral conscience telling you need to like repent of something. No, it's just we're trying to be a happy-go-lucky movement that appeals to the mushy middle.
All positivity, nothing negative, which is really not a good trait for a movement that's trying to make an evil seen as an evil.
Yeah.
When you're an anti-slavery advocate, you're not saying pro-freedom, pro these kinds of things. You're saying I am against the enslavement of fellow image bearers of God because it is barbaric and evil and terrible. Pro-lifers, it's really just that. I think that was a big part of the motivation as well. It's just to be seen as this positive thing. Like we're pro-women, we're pro-babies, we're pro all these different things. You need to be negative. You need to be focusing on how negative abortion is, because otherwise you're never going to win with essentially just making people feel good. That doesn't make people convict. That doesn't convict people to change. It just may cast you in a better light. You might think. I think it makes them look fake. I think it makes them look really fake. But it's not actually going to benefit the preborn children who are being murdered, because you're not painting an accurate picture of what's happening to them. So it's vague. It's vague and it's soft at best. But then there's other things that they'll say, like choose life. That's another example you see in bumper stickers all the time.
Yeah,
and that's.
Oh, I love how common this one is. Like there's I think it's like a whole movement, or it's like an organization. I think it's like Choose Life license plate. I think it's an organization that's getting these Choose Life license plates available in all these different states. And this is actually what the inspiration for this show came from. We were talking with some friends. About a friend who's now an abolitionist who has a Choose Life a Choose Life license plate on their car, and we got talking about whether or not that's good messaging or not. And there's nothing. It's not inherently evil, right? It's not immoral. It's not dehumanizing some preborn children.
Yeah, it's like the biblical phrase. It's like choose life.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just it's so weak. Like it can mean so many different things, and it's not creating the conversation that needs to be created. The conversation that needs created is, does abortion need to be abolished because it's intentional killing, because it's murder? No, it's like, should a woman is it better for her to choose life, or is it better for her to have an abortion. Like that's the conversation that you're creating with this sort of thing.
It plays into the pro-choice paradigm too, because it's like, oh, you can either be for it or against it. It's more of a personal opinion. And if you just say, oh, choose life, you're more expressing opinion. You're not expressing any kind of moral outrage at the alternative, which, again, you don't want to be playing into the basic premises of your enemies. You want to be rebutting them and saying, no, this is not a legitimate choice that anyone should have. You should not be pro-choice when it comes to rape. You should not be pro-choice when it comes to murder. You should not be pro-choice when it comes to child molestation. That's an evil, terrible thing for you to think. So I'm not just going to say pro not raping somebody. I'm going to say I'm against rape because it's evil and it's terrible and you shouldn't do it. The rhetoric ought to reflect the truthfulness of the issue and how clear-cut it is. It shouldn't be a matter of making it a matter of debate or objectivity or something like that. You know, we can have debate, sure, but ultimately I'm going to be telling you how evil you are for supporting something that is evil, because that's what you should be told.
Right. Yeah, and just a quick aside, the friend that we were talking about, or one of the people we were talking about this with, has a really cool band that you guys should go check out. They're called We Are the Guests. You can find them on Spotify, YouTube, music and all that stuff. They're really good, so just quick shout out to them. Go check them out. They're really cool. Cool people.
For sure.
Yeah. Anyway. On to the next one, which is love them both. And one of the things I like about this one, when there was the vote in Ireland on whether or not to change the Irish Constitution on abortion, the American pro-lifers went over and kind of advised the Irish pro-lifers, how to fight this. And love them both became like the slogan of like the vote no. Of the vote no effort, and it softens it. Again, it gets people to not be thinking about the fact that abortion's murder. Like the way you win that vote is if you make people actually understand that abortion's murder. If you don't do that, you're going to lose. You've already lost. And not only do they not do that, they don't even try to do that. Because they think they'll lose if they do that. But that's how you get a culture that will never accept the fact that abortion's murder. Because if the pro-lifers aren't willing to speak about abortion as if it's murder, why would anyone else believe it's murder? Why is the mushy middle going to believe it's murder? Why is the, progressive pro-abort going to think it's murder if the pro-lifer won't even speak about it like it's murder? It's just a really ridiculous strategy. It's the political experts, they've poll tested this stuff and they've gotten stupidity.
It's the equivalent of giving somebody a pro-life cupcake and then being Wilberforce and taking your colleagues to smell the stench of the slave ships and all the dysentery and the death that was produced by those ships. Like that's the difference here.
One of those is an appropriate reaction to evil. One of those is weak sauce garbage that's not going to accomplish anything in a trillion years if you do it every single day, every moment of your life.
And it also becomes so not that we shouldn't love people who have abortions. We should love our enemies, but we need to be clear about who our enemies are as well. When you use rhetoric like love them both, I cannot see that about any other issue. Like people don't usually talk like that when it comes to pedophilia, for instance. When we talk about pedophilia, we don't say love them both, love the pedophile and the innocent victim. We think what's love for the pedophile is for him to be put in jail forever. Right, like that's more what we're talking about. Like that person is not someone who should be out on the streets. We talk about them accurately about how evil they are. And when you just have catchy phrases, I don't even think it's that catchy as well though. But when you have phrases like "love them both," you're not reflecting accurately what the weight of what that person is doing. Like they're murdering their child. The one who is failing to love their child is the mother who kills them and the father who kills them. That's what we should be talking about. But instead we're talking about, for whatever reason, loving, like putting them on the same plane almost. Again, this is the two victim type narrative. Putting them on the same plane and saying, let's love them both because that's what's going to end abortion. But really it's, we need to love them by saying they should be criminalized for murdering their child and failing to love their child as they ought to. Which is why abortion exists.
And again, it's not there's anything inherently wrong with saying love people. Like, that's not inherently wrong, but it can't be the thing that we go to make our case. It can't be when we're talking about the killing of image bearers. It's got to be about that. It can't be about, empowering women or being the most pro woman. That's not even a fight that you're gonna win in our culture, but they're trying to appeal to the culture, so they do that. But you're not going to win that battle. The only way to win the battle is to win it on your own terms. You don't play on the other team's terms if you want to win long term. So you've got to keep the main thing. Abortion's murder. It ought to be abolished. Love them both isn't going to cut it.
So the next category of pro-life rhetoric that we see is things that are very dehumanizing or...
Right. And they're not always intentionally so, and they don't have to be intentionally so. But as we talked about with the kind of just trying to paint them as extremists, you're implicitly communicating something when you do that. When you say we're just trying to be the common sense moderates, you're saying that a 20-week abortion ban is common sense. Mm-hmm. Now, that may not be what you're intending to communicate, but that is the implicit teaching of what you are communicating.
Yeah.
And so there's many, many examples this we could go through. You've done some research and just pulled up a few here.
Yeah.
And the first
trying
one
to get the most recent stuff, so we're not. Doesn't seem like we're just cherry picking out of something that things that happened years ago or something. But this is like recent stuff that people are putting out.
Right. And so like Students for Life saying, abortion seems pretty fetus phobic to us, mm-hmm. right? You're sort of, you're appealing to the later stages again of preborn development, but then what about embryos and what about zygotes and what about, human beings at every stage, mm-hmm. right? You could have just as easily said abortion seems pretty unborn phobic to us or preborn phobic to us. There's ways that you can communicate what you want to communicate, I hope what you want to communicate. Mm-hmm. There's ways of doing it without implying that there's some, less extreme or more acceptable version of abortion. But with messaging like this, again, I don't think they were trying to, to dehumanize human beings who are in the stage referred to as embryo, right? But that is the effect of messaging such as this one.
And then so this is an example from Stand True, and it says abortion: one heart breaks, another heart stops. So it's obvious why they're trying to do this. In this case, they're trying to emphasize the regret of a mother who murders her child. Which, there's a lot of women who regret killing their children. There's some people who don't regret killing their children because their hearts are hardened, and they need Christ. They need to repent. But when you say another heart stops, it automatically leaves out an entire category of children who have been murdered by abortion. And it allows for the culture to continue to ignore them. A lot of the times, for instance, in vitro fertilization or things like hormonal birth control, most hormonal birth controls are abortifacient in nature. A lot of people don't know that. But this kind of rhetoric is dehumanizing for younger children, and the reason they do that is because they think, well, if you can see the baby more, then a lot more people are going to be able to come against that. Like, that's why they emphasize third trimester abortion so much, is because when you have a baby that is fully developed with their head cut off, that's a very gruesome image to look at, as opposed to like an embryo where you can't really see anything.
Right, that's a very winnable argument, is to argue about third trimester abortions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so a lot of this rhetoric, it's stopping a beating heart, is intrinsically ageist. It's not focusing on the entire evil of abortion. It's allowing us to sort of take the low-hanging fruit, and in so doing actually lose ground over time, which is what's happening.
And this isn't even the worst. I mean, there's examples even worse than this one. There's like a very common pro-life meme that's, if life ends when the heartbeat stops, then life begins when the heartbeat begins.
Yeah, that was also Stand True. I wasn't able to find that meme, but they did that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it's false, and everyone who knows anything about basic biology knows it's false. Life begins at conception, and that's not a fact that's up for dispute. So the fact that you're trying to argue that life begins at conception is really, really crazy. But the reason they do it is because they make the case about abortion attached to these kind of superficial, what's the word I'm looking for? Tangential issues, because they don't want to call it murder, and so they want to focus on pain capability. They want to focus on heartbeats, and again, the implicit effect of this is to dehumanize children without heartbeats. Mm-hmm. And so it's a story I tell a lot, but it's because it's a really good, very educational story. And I was meeting with my state senator in Ohio, and I tell his aide, this is why you need to introduce a heartbeat or an abolition bill. Here's what an abolition bill is. And then her response, which is going to stay with me for as long as I live, this was very interesting, but it's Senator Brenner's personal religious conviction that life begins at a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Where does someone learn something that's stupid, right? From the heartbeat bill, from pro-life memes. It's just this dehumanizing effect that messaging like this has. And again, you have to keep the main thing the main thing, and they fail to do that when they do stuff like this so consistently.
Yeah.
And it's like they almost never. It's not even that they're not making the main thing. They never almost ever get to the main thing. They make it all about the tangential things.
Yeah.
They'll almost never just call it murder and say that abortion should be completely abolished. They'll almost never say that because they're trying to make being pro-life a winnable issue that candidates can run on and get elected.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to shift the culture with bold truth.
Yeah, and in the spirit of bringing up things we've brought up before, just coming back to that verse, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. This is exactly doing that. It's accepting the premise of the fool and then answering according to that premise and making a fool out of yourself. And making it much harder for you to actually win this argument in the future. You're supposed to answer the fool in a different way, answer the fool according to his folly, so that he's not wise in his own eyes. In this case, what that would be doing is to say abortion advocates do not have any basis for human equality at all. They don't have a basis for themselves being protected because they're not as developed as somebody else. They're not as sentient or as intelligent as someone else. Yeah. And so because of those things, they don't have a basis for human equality, and they should be killed according to their worldview. But thank God their worldview is wrong. Thank God they're being fools in this because they do have a right to life. They do have a right to not be murdered because they're wrong. Exactly because they're wrong.
Right.
And that's what answering the fool should look like. But essentially what they do is they just buy their premise so that they can try and convince as many of them as they can to join in some kind of abortion restriction or something like that.
And the premise being that something superficial is what makes us valuable, that pain capability or a heartbeat or some function that a human being is able to perform is what makes us... Some developmental
stage or...
Right. Is what makes you valuable and worthy of being protected by law. You've accepted that premise when you have messaging like this, or when you support legislation that is directly in accordance with that premise. And so you've got to play your own game if you're going to win. You can't adopt their premises and then beat them with their premises because you've already lost. You've accepted their premises. That something about humans makes us valuable, not just the fact that we are human.
Yeah.
And so we can't keep doing this. We've got to communicate something that communicates that all human beings are valuable. Not that some are more valuable than others, not that some abortions are more extreme and some are more, common sense, but that abortion is murder across the board, and that demand, or that, actually bold truth speaking is what will shift the culture.
Yeah. If abortion restrictions are common sense, then common sense doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So the next category of pro-life rhetoric that we think is very problematic, we'll say, is distracting things that don't actually focus people on the evil of abortion, but they try to pull more people into the pro-life camp. I should stop doing air quotes. I actually had a Facebook post about how you shouldn't do that. It's not good to be pro-life. It's better to be, you want to be an abolitionist, not a pro-lifer. But they distract people. They get people thinking about something else, and it's all in an effort to try to get these restrictions that they're advocating for in. In this case, this was a really ridiculous example that we saw. It says, it's a meme by Students for Life for those who are listening and can't see this. It says, care about your water, then you should, sorry, let's see. It says, care about your water, then you should care what Planned Parenthood tells you to flush down your toilets. So essentially this campaign is to prevent the aborted babies who are killed by pill abortions from being flushed down the toilet. That's what the campaign is about. They're trying to make it so that you can't, I think it was, they're trying to deal with some kind of restriction that the, who was it? Some governmental institution was lifting. And so they're still doing this campaign. They're trying to get it so that you can't flush aborted babies down the toilet. That is not the kind of rhetoric that's going to get people more angry about abortion. Like you're making it about an environmental concern when someone is flushing babies down the toilet, when you should be concerned about flushing babies down the toilet. Like, do you really want to get environmentalists outraged about flushing babies down the toilet because it might hurt the environment, or do you want people to be outraged because they're flushing babies down the toilet in the first place and they're killing them?
Right. Yeah, this isn't the sort of thing. Yeah, this is not culture-shifting thing. This is to try to appeal to people where they're at. And there's a bunch of environmental pro-aborts out there, and we're going to try to get them to support a regulation by saying that this is bad for the environment. Now, is stuff like this inherently evil, not necessarily, but when stuff like this is put forward almost or to a very significant degree in the place of the main thing, it becomes a major, major problem because you're almost never saying abortion's murder, it must be abolished. Again, that needs to be the focus. But you've got all these tangential things to try to get, the BLM people on your side, or to try to get the environmentalists on your side, and all this stuff, and you're losing sight of the main thing. And that's how you get, again, this is, back to the point we made earlier, that's how you get a culture where 46% of people are pro-life and 12% want to abolish abortion. That's how you get that.
Yeah. The other one, I think this is, we see this a whole lot, but it's a meme about Margaret Sanger. It says, "Racist, now end her legacy, defund Planned Parenthood." And the whole premise of this meme is that Planned Parenthood is still a racist organization. They're still doing what Margaret Sanger essentially set out to do, was to reduce the black population and to get rid of them. She actually didn't even believe in abortion. Planned Parenthood at that point wasn't doing abortions. But the idea here is that abortion is not only whatever else it is, it's also racist. And you're trying to get everyone who's concerned about race to be involved in speaking out against abortion. And there's no problem with someone saying to someone who cares about race but doesn't care about abortion, about racism but doesn't care about abortion, there's no problem with someone saying to them, well, you're inconsistent because black babies are just as valuable as any other black people and you shouldn't kill them, but you think it's okay to kill them. There's nothing wrong with that point. But to make the point that abortion is a racist thing and we should be outraged because it's racist takes away from the fact that you're trying to get people outraged about the ageism that we're experiencing in our culture right now, about the fact that people totally do not care if someone is young, of a certain age, and they are killed. If these kinds of acts were being carried out on anyone else that was older, everyone would be outraged, right? And so they're trying to appeal to that outrage and bring it in, but really you should be focusing on the ageism that exists and making ageism a dirty word that people don't want to be. The reason racism is a dirty word nowadays is because people who were better at pushing a movement before us focused on the issue itself and drew attention to the evil that it was, and that's how it was abolished. Not because they were looking for common sense regulations of racism or racist acts, but because they were drawing attention to it, they were exposing it, and they were letting people see exactly what it was, and their rhetoric reflected that. The rhetoric of Students for Life in this case, yes, you can appeal to historical movements before, sure, but when you try to make it about modern day racism and you try to make abortion about racism now, it's just not putting the attention on abortion that we should be. It's distracting from the actual issue, and you're not trying to make ageism seem as bad as it actually is.
Right, and again, this isn't intrinsically an evil thing to say or anything, that Margaret Sanger was a racist. There's nothing wrong with pointing that out, but it's a question of focus. And how often are we saying abortion's murder, it must be abolished, versus how often are we trying to hit all these other tangential things that distract from the issue that abortion's murder, it must be abolished. And the ratio there is wildly, wildly off in the pro-life movement because, again, they're just trying to appeal to those in the middle or to those on the other side. They're not trying to actually shift the entire paradigm. And the result is, that you're not shifting the entire paradigm.
Yeah, and this whole thing too also pretty much all pro-life rhetoric. It underscores a problem that exists with pro-life rhetoric. It sort of shifts responsibility off of the people who commit murder and onto some other group of people. Like in this case, Margaret Sanger or Planned Parenthood or the abortion lobby or the abortionist.
Yeah.
But the reality is we have a culture of parents who murder their babies. Like when you think about evil actions taken against somebody, those are only enhanced and they're only made worse by the fact that it's their own parents doing it. It's not putting the responsibility where it ought to be on the people who are doing it and saying, look, people are murdering their babies. They are responsible for this. This is just blame shifting onto somebody else. It's saying, oh, Margaret Sanger, she's orchestrating all these black abortions or something like that. That takes responsibility off of people when you should be putting it on them and saying, this culture is wicked. They murder their own children. And that's not just some group of people out there. That's not Margaret Sanger. That's not Planned Parenthood. That's you. That's you, church. That's you, or that's you, the Christians that are in this culture. That's you, the people who are murdering their babies. You are apathetic towards this. You need to repent. That's the type of thing that we should be doing, not shifting responsibility off of those people. But this shifts it off to someone else, and it doesn't actually lay the responsibility on the true culprits, the people who create the market for abortion in the first place, the people who go seek that out and pay for it, which is their own parents. Those are the people responsible for the genocide of abortion in America.
And there's one other point on distraction here, even within this meme, and that's this defund Planned Parenthood thing. And I don't want to spend too much time on this point, but it is a distracting point, and this is even, I guess maybe even a bit controversial with some people who may identify with the abolitionist movement, who will say, well, it's we're not compromising on abortion. We're not saying it's okay to kill some children, and so it's okay to make our rally about defunding abortion providers, and we saw that at a rally recently. We love the people who put on that rally, and the people who spoke at that rally. We appreciate the fact that there was a rally to support the abolition of abortion in that state. But the fact that there were a whole bunch of signs in the crowd saying, defund, abortion or defund Planned Parenthood, that distracts from the issue, which needs to be abortion is murder. It must be abolished, right? That's not to say that even supporting that bill is evil, but it is to say that can't become what the rally is about. That can't be what people are signing the petition for. That can't be the signs people are holding up. The main thing has to be the main thing. And so, it's not as if, these people are awful for supporting, a defunding bill, or even that you shouldn't support, defunding bill. Like if there's a vote to defund it, we're not going to say you're an evil person if you vote for that bill, right? You're not compromising. You're saying it's okay to kill some children as long as there's no rape exception in the defunding bill, right? But you are taking, by campaigning and making the rally to a significant degree about defunding, you're taking attention away from the main thing, and that's a problem. That's a problem. The abolitionist movement needs to be a prophetic voice saying abortion must be abolished. And if it becomes even partially about defunding abortion, if that's part of our messaging, then we're watering down our messaging. We're not being the prophetic voice, which we need to be. And so it's a problem. It distracts from the main thing.
Yeah.
So
So this next point is on how pro-life rhetoric often makes it about healthcare. And so this is this was a movie or a documentary. This was made by a pro-lifer, and it was made to essentially shine light on the Gosnell situation, where Gosnell was a despicable, evil serial killer. Any abortionist is a serial killer. It's just people were shocked that Gosnell acted more like it than others do, or we found out that he acted more like it than others do. It's not shocking that Gosnell did anything that he did, given that he's murdering babies. There's no other things that you can do that are going to be more shocking than that thing.
Yeah,
but
there's no difference between your local abortionist and Kermit Gosnell morally. Legally, is there a difference? Yes, but morally, is there a difference? Absolutely not. Every abortionist is Kermit Gosnell.
Yeah.
But this documentary that we're gonna play a little clip from the trailer here. Again, the focus, it really was kind of unbelievable. Like throughout they're interviewing pro-aborts and saying, yeah, Kermit Gosnell is awful. Like he never should have been able to do this without sterile equipment. That's crazy. How is that legal that he was allowed to do that? And again, it was so maddening to watch. Anyway, we'll play a bit from the trailer of this documentary here.
Yeah.
It's called 3801 Lancaster, American Tragedy.
Had state health officials done what they were supposed to do, inspect him on an annual basis, this arguably would never have happened.
It would have happened. It just would have happened in a more sanitary way. The same thing would have happened. The baby would have been killed, but the baby would have just been just before coming out of the womb and not already out of the womb. There's no difference there, but they're speaking of it as if, all these lives would have been saved and all this stuff. But no, there would have been no difference had they cleaned up the clinic.
Yeah, it's really hard to determine what the end goal is with a lot of the rhetoric in this documentary, because best case scenario, Kermit Gosnell was far more sanitary than he was, and Kermit Gosnell would have continued to murder babies. He would not be in jail today. Women who were killed in the process of killing their babies wouldn't be dead, and Gosnell would have killed thousands more babies. He would be killing to this day. So it's really weird. The whole point of this rhetoric is supposed to be we need to get more restrictions on abortion facilities, right? And in this case, they weren't checking up on Gosnell. They weren't making sure that he was up to code or whatever codes that existed.
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, they want him to be inspected more, which would have just allowed him to evade any kind of justice for all the murder that he was doing, which is ultimately not a good goal.
Yeah.
Kermit Gosnell at some point became a monster.
What? At some point? Like at the point where he stopped killing babies in the womb and started, delivering the child and then killing him, that's when he became a monster? Mm-hmm. Not the fact that he was murdering babies. Mm-hmm. And again, it's the whole thing about treating some babies differently than others. I don't know if this guy was intending to do that, but that's what he's doing with the way that he's speaking. Mm-hmm. And this is a pattern. It's not, again, this isn't a one-off thing. It's a pattern of treating some babies differently than they treat others.
And a lot of these people in this documentary are not going to be pro-lifers at all. But these are the people that pro-lifers have chosen to use to craft the narrative that they're trying to craft.
Exactly.
They're trying to say we need better restrictions on abortion facilities. And overall, their goal is let's shut more of them down. But they're putting these people up on a pedestal to talk about Kermit Gosnell, and the things they're saying are, at some point, Kermit Gosnell became a monster. He always was. Just because he was doing partial birth abortions, just because some women died in his clinic, that doesn't make Kermit Gosnell worse or better than any other abortionist.
He became a monster when he violated our sanitary regulations. Right? It's absolute insanity.
Yeah.
But this is what the movie is all about.
Mm-hmm.
I just think at some point he had honorable intentions and he wanted to help women. But
this is like an Abby Johnson thing too. It's like she's always painting herself as a hero when she was in the abortion facility. I saw this really long self-aggrandizing post where she was talking about how she's always been a fighter and she's always been tough. Like, you don't run an abortion clinic like she did unless you're tough and you're strong and you're all these things. That's the exact kind of thing that they're showing Kermit Gosnell with, except he has a different outcome than Abby. Like, he murdered babies. He was caught because he was unsanitary and because he was doing partial birth abortions and because women died at his clinic, right? But they sort of paint him as this kind of hero in the beginning, like he was honorable or whatever. No one does that with like Ted Bundy or any other serial killer. They say, look, we can give you an insight into what they were thinking and how they got to this point, but ultimately they were an evil dirtbag who did terrible things.
Yeah. If I were a pro-choicer, I would have framed this movie exactly the way it's framed. Mm-hmm. I would frame it in such a way that makes Kermit Gosnell look really, really bad, so you're kind of doing away with this PR liability.
He's the exception.
Right, he's the exception, but you've got these good intentions, and he wasn't bad, but then he became bad when he broke the law or whatever. Mm-hmm. That is how a pro-choicer should have made this movie, and it would have benefited the abortion movement. Mm-hmm. But this was pro-lifers who made this movie and benefited the abortion movement by doing this. It's really, really crazy.
Honorable intent. Like he went out, he got a medical degree so that he could be an abortionist. And that's what he did with his life. That's not honorable intentions. Yeah. Ever. At all.
But that's the pro-life framing of Kermit Gosnell in a pro-life documentary intended to help, regulate abortion. Just really insane stuff.
I think Abby Johnson still maintains that she had honorable intentions when she was doing everything she was doing at the abortion clinic she worked at. She still talks as though she was always in it to love women and all these different things. But it's like, you can't get involved in killing babies and murdering babies and have good intent. Like that doesn't happen. You are killing babies, you have bad intent. Whatever you think you're doing for women, like a guy who relieves poor women of all of the burdens they have by going and chopping off the heads of her born children. Oh, really honorable intent. No, doesn't have honorable intent. He's a wicked person who's killing children. Yeah. And it's the same thing with this. But this is a really common problem with pro-life movies, like Unplanned even. Unplanned has got this scene that just makes me sick. It's like it's playing Overcomer, this really like happy music, while Abby Johnson is trying to murder as many babies as she can before this tornado comes through, and it's treating it like this triumphant scene, or the whole vibe is just off. It feels so sickening the way the movie did this, and like I would not recommend watching Unplanned or supporting it. I think it's a really terrible movie, but what that scene does is just the exact opposite of what a filmmaker should go in to do. Yeah. They should have gone in to paint Abby, and if Abby, is a repentant person, she should have wanted this. But to be painted as an evil person who repented of their sin, like to just deal with the gravity of her sin and not try to make heroic moments within the Holocaust that she was perpetuating in whatever city she was in Texas.
Yeah.
That's what you should be doing. And that's the same thing that this Gosnell movie does. They even paint it as though he was a good guy going in. And I'm sure if Gosnell had changed his mind and stopped aborting children, pro-lifers would have put him up on a pedestal and would have made a very similar overcomer type scene for a guy like Gosnell. That definitely would have happened. But even what did happen with the barbaric, terrible person that Gosnell was and is still a bad outcome.
Yeah, and it's about appealing to people where they are, not trying to shift culture or even trying to force people to shift where they are. You're trying to appeal to people where they are. And so instead of saying, abortionists are murderers, like you're a murderer and you kill human beings for a living and get paid to do it. You're a contract killer, right? But instead of that, it's like, no, you have good intentions. And you were talking about you've seen Abby Johnson say stuff like, yeah, I was trying to help women and I had good intentions when I was doing it, but now I realized that I was wrong, but I still had good intentions. Like you said, you've seen her say stuff like that. And again, that's what they're doing in this movie. And it's not what's going to cause genuine repentance. And so
it's sort of, again,
cut it out.
It does the same thing. It just shifts responsibility off of of all responsible parties. It's like anyone who actually could be responsible, it shifts it off of them. Margaret Sanger is dead now. Like, she's a really good person to blame, She can't really deal with any of the consequences of the stuff that she did in her lifetime. Now, for us, so it's easy to blame someone who's dead. And I think that's what the pro-life movement does. Like, Abby Johnson has an organization that finds jobs for people who murder other people. Whatever you think about that, it's like it doesn't treat it as an issue of justice. It treats it as an issue of something else.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily a bad thing to help someone get a job after they've left the abortion clinic. Like, we have friends in Texas, John Speed and them have done that with someone who quit at the Whole Women's Health. But when your strategy to get them to quit is to pretend they're not that bad and they never have been, when that's the strategy, that's the problem. Because then the main thing is not the main thing. Then you're pretending they don't actually have to repent. They were just a victim of whatever, propaganda, Planned Parenthood told them. Even the people killing are victims, right? No one's, right, like you said, no one's culpable. Everyone's a victim of some, conspiracy to brainwash everybody. And is Planned Parenthood trying to brainwash people? Sure. Does that mean they're not responsible for murdering children if they work at Planned Parenthood? No. They are responsible, and they need to be told that if they're going to genuinely repent. Yeah. And that's beautiful. Man, it's such an amazing opportunity to speak about how awesome God is, how I, a mass murderer, repented of this wickedness, but instead it's like a playing down of it. It's like, it never, was that evil in my heart to begin with. It was just, trying to do right, but not quite seeing the issue rightly, but meaning well, and that's, again, it's really, really bad. The main thing's not the main thing. The culture's not shifting. People aren't repenting. It's just some surface level, short-sighted, making abortion a winning issue. And you're not actually making progress.
Yeah. So something, we don't even need to show an example of this. It's so common in pro-life rhetoric. But the idea that we're hashtag winning, that there's, we're somehow, because we pass all these restrictions or because abortion pro-life laws get on the books, even if they're struck down, that is demonstrating that we're winning and we're the pro-life gen or whatever. This is really bad rhetoric. This is something that just makes people way more comfortable with an evil. It doesn't make people fired up and ready to abolish it. It doesn't actually activate anyone.
Right. The important thing to know about abortion laws is that the key to keeping a bill to abolish abortion from passing is by convincing people that they're winning because they pass, 3 new pro-life regulations this year. Yeah. That's how the Senate in Oklahoma prevents abortion from being abolished, is they pass a whole bunch of bills to regulate abortion some way, and so they can call themselves pro-life, and then they'll vote down the bill to abolish it. But they can only get away with voting down the bill to abolish it if they pass all these bills and then say hashtag life is winning in America. That's the only way that they can prevent abortion from being abolished, because this is a state where it's 80% professing Christians, probably 80+% pro-life. Even many of the Democrats and atheists are pro-life here in Oklahoma. And so the only way to keep something like abolition from passing in a state like Oklahoma is to convince people that they're winning when they're not. Elizabeth Hyrick has a really good section on this that I quote a lot, but I won't do the whole thing like I usually do. I'll just summarize. But she basically says that basically Satan has ensured that slavery would continue by convincing these people who are calling themselves abolitionists to be satisfied with gradual gains. Yeah. And that was the only way that they could keep it from being abolished. And that idea must have originated with the prince of all deceivers. And that's not a nice thing to say necessarily, but I think it's true. I think it's this gradualism has deluded people into thinking they're winning as children are being murdered. And it's made abolishing abortion very, very difficult when it should be very, very easy in a state where you've got 80% professing Christians.
Yeah. It's Isaiah. It's like peace when there is no peace. And that is exactly what this is doing. It makes people far more lax about abortion, far more apathetic about abortion, because they think we're somehow on this downhill now because they're hearing about how we're winning and this is the pro-life generation and so many other things. And it's essentially just crying out that it's saying that there needs to be peace, or that there is peace when there isn't any. We're living in a Holocaust after almost 50 years we haven't gotten rid of. We haven't stopped doing. Yeah. That's not winning. That's failing miserably. And that's because, the church has not yet risen up to abolish abortion. And that's what we need to do. Yeah,
because they've been lulled to complacency by being told they're winning when they're not even doing anything to get into the battle.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, the point I made previously was not to say that, pro-lifers are satanic or anything like that, but this idea of fighting abortion gradually, I think it originated from Satan, who's looking at a state like Oklahoma and thinking, man, how do I keep child sacrifice going in a state like Oklahoma? Man, how could I possibly do that? That's impossible, right? How do we do this? Oh yeah, just tell them they're winning when they pass an ultrasound bill, or a 20-week ban or something. It's the only way. And again, I take no joy in saying that, but this idea is very, very, very evil, and it prevents abortion from being abolished. And we've got to cut it out. Yeah. We're not winning until the children are protected by law from being murdered. Yeah. Not after 20 weeks, not after the mom's looked at an ultrasound, not after the mom has heard of the heartbeat, not after she's waited for 48 or 72 hours, when children cannot be murdered by law. I don't want to hear anything about victory until then. So they got to cut this one out. Got to cut this one out.
Yep. The next one, and this is really the example that really highlights the two victim narrative. It's like the abortion is not just murdering babies, but there is a definite other victim of abortion, and that is the woman. This was a whole campaign that Students for Life did for a while. I think it was back in 2015, and even as a pro-lifer, I thought this was just awful. I thought this was the stupidest thing that they could possibly do. But it was abortion betrays women. That was the thing that they were talking about. All their banners said abortion betrays women. Their podiums when they did rallies for this thing was abortion betrays women. And that was the whole point of the campaign. It was highlighting the betrayal that abortion is to women. What that means, I don't know. How does it betray women? I'm not really sure. It's a woman who's going in and murdering her baby, or a father and a mother who are murdering their baby. But the whole point of this line of attack is sort of to just get the women who have murdered their babies to feel less bad about it and be more friendly towards pro-lifers, to not be judgy or whatever it is that they're trying to avoid with this. But essentially, yes, it's the same thing. It's building a big tent. It's like getting those people who have murdered their babies not to feel too bad about what they've done, and to convince them that they've been lied to by the culture and they've been victimized. They were betrayed by the abortion industry who convinced them, who are the ones who are ultimately to blame.
And that's not to say that you have to be a jerk about it when you confront someone with their sin. You shouldn't be a jerk. You should be gentle. You should season your words. You should choose them carefully, but you can't pretend like they weren't sinning. Yeah. And when you say that you were betrayed and you're a victim, you're telling them you didn't sin here. Now, I don't think pro-lifers actually believe that, because pro-lifers, occasionally will admit that, women, have found redemption from abortion, which implies that they did actually do something wrong. So I think this whole women betrayed thing is just a political ploy, but it is communicating that women don't sin when they have abortions, that they're innocent victims in the matter, and that's having very damaging effects. Like we had a bill to abolish abortion in Texas, and the main objection was Jeff Leach standing there in his chair, in his committee chairman position, saying, "No, we can never pass anything that might allow for a woman to face legal repercussions for what she did in murdering her own child." Right? That is the fruit of this. Is abolition bills being killed and 110,000 more children being murdered in Texas from 2019 to this year. Yeah. And so it's crazy. It's crazy. And I don't think they actually believe it, but they say it because they think this is what makes abortion a winning issue. This is how we, in our short-sighted plans, here's how we win the next election or something. But the fruit of that is that you're actually setting the entire cause back. You're making abortion harder to abolish. You're making it harder for people to repent because you're telling them they don't need to.
Yeah.
And so you're getting in the way of abolition. You're getting in the way of the true and full gospel being received by people. Like, let that sink in. Like, you're preventing someone from thinking that they even need the gospel for what they did. I mean, it's so harmful in so many ways, and it's got to stop. There are not two victims in an abortion. It's certainly not in the way that they say there is. Like, say someone grows up to be a murderer of born people. This person murdered a whole bunch of born people. Now, if they were a victim in their childhood and they were brainwashed as a kid into thinking that violence is an okay way to express your emotions, sure, is that person a victim of difficult life circumstances? Sure.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's appropriate in that murder trial to go, no, this person shouldn't face legal repercussions because they're a victim?
Yeah.
Is that an appropriate thing? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There has to be justice. There has to be justice. There should have been justice for whatever happened to that killer when they were a child. And because there was no justice there, you get the cycle repeating and more violence, more bloodshed. And so you've got to act justly. You've got to speak the truth. You can't be so afraid of offending people that you don't speak the truth. And they can say in there, whatever, there's, Students for Life, Mallory Quigley video that we, hashtag, brave and courageous, right? We speak the truth boldly, but you're not. And it's like you're almost admitting that you're not speaking the truth boldly.
Yeah, and two biblical points here is Romans 1, you have everyone knows God, right? And the reason they murder, the reason they have is because they've twisted the image of God, the person that they know, the creator of the universe, and their hearts have been darkened and they murder because of it, right? They are wicked in their hearts. And so even though they know God and they know his righteous decree, they know what is right, they go against it and they kill other people. And the other one is Eve in the garden. She is held responsible for the lies she believes. And she was told a pretty compelling lie in the garden. She was told, by a talking snake that this fruit is going to make you like God, right? That's a pretty good lie. She believed it, and she was held responsible for that. So was Adam. Adam was held responsible for that. Lies don't absolve us of responsibility. Right. If a culture is lying to us about what the preborn are, we are still responsible because we know better. Everybody knows abortion is murder. That's why that's part of abolitionist rhetoric, is because we're leaning on what the scripture says, which is that everybody knows abortion is murder. Everybody knows that it's killing an innocent human being, and we ought to reject it. They go the exact opposite way, and they say, no, you don't know that abortion is murder. You were lied to. You're a victim. Yeah. That's not what you are, though. We know biblically you are made in the image of God, and because of that you can recognize other image bearers of God. You know that the child in your womb is a human being, and no amount of lying will absolve you of that. So the thing to do is to repent and put your faith in Jesus Christ, not to make it so your sins were not your responsibility. Right? That's what the messaging should be. That's what abolitionists do. But pro-lifers constantly make it an issue of them being victims.
Yeah, and it's just this, again, it's them being very short-sighted. All they want to do is get their foot in the door with somebody. Like get someone to maybe listen to them and not think they're mean. And the result of that is they have to water things so far down that they're not even accomplishing the objectives that they need to achieve, which is get people to repent and put their faith in Christ, which is get people to see that abortion is murder and it ought to be abolished. But instead you get a bunch of professing pro-life people who kind of maybe give some half-hearted repentance, but don't actually grapple with the fact that, yes, I killed my own child and I need to repent of that and find God's forgiveness for that. And so, it's short-sighted. Everything they do is, all the mistakes they make are because they're short-sighted, and they don't they don't really believe that if they speak the biblical truth boldly, that word isn't going to return void. They think it will return void because they don't do it. Because they think it's not going to, we did some poll tests and a bunch of people told us that they don't want to hear the bold truth. And so we're not going to tell them the bold truth. We're going to tell them what they want to hear and appeal to them and flatter them. Mm-hmm. No, speak the bold truth.
Yeah, they're holding up their biggest mistakes in what they've done as a movement as the triumphs, and they're not. They're failures. So the next point is how pro-lifers are really, really headstrong on their resistance to ever calling abortion murder. It's killing. It's they can make comparisons to manslaughter. They can do all kinds of different things like that, but they won't call it murder for whatever reason. And this is a really good example from Students for Life. For those of you who can't see the meme, it says, "Why is it considered involuntary manslaughter if a preborn baby dies in a car accident, but not when the abortionist performs surgery to end his or her life?" So just think about that example for a second. They're not even talking about the woman at this point. They're talking about, within the two-victim narrative, the abortionist is supposed to be the one who's fully culpable, according to them, like the one who is actually committing murder. And they chose to make this a comparison about involuntary manslaughter because they're so hesitant to actually call it murder. Like, they're so scared of calling it murder that they're going to make it a comparison about involuntary manslaughter. If you actually change this analogy, you could do it pretty easily. Like, you can make the comparison.
It's not hard to do this right in a way that doesn't compare abortion to manslaughter.
Yeah, like a woman who is murdered who's pregnant is considered double homicide. They're not making that comparison here because they don't want to make the comparison to homicide. They want to make it something softer, like involuntary manslaughter. Why? Because, I don't know, it's more palatable. It plays to a culture that is so in sin that it's murdering babies, and it makes them feel better about what they're doing. But it does not bring the weight that is necessary. And this is not going to lead a nation to repent if you're trying to convince them that abortion is something like involuntary manslaughter. It's not. Yeah. It is very voluntary murder. That's what it is.
Yeah. And it's not that I think the person who made this meme was thinking, man, how do I devalue a preborn child's life? It's just that speaking abortion as if it really is murder is just so foreign to pro-lifers that when they make a meme like this, even here, they're not going to call it murder. Even in the comparison, it's so foreign to them that they're just never going to do it. Now, some of them have like an intellectual, like I've seen Scott Klusendorf give like an intellectual defense of not calling abortion murder because he's saying he's trying to be, technically correct. The law doesn't call it murder, so we shouldn't call it murder because it's not considered murder under the law. I would say that you should speak of something as it really is, not how your evil culture treats it.
Yeah.
If you want the culture to treat it as it really is, speak of it as it really is. It really is murder, whether or not the culture is right or not, and they're very, very wrong. Treat them like they're wrong. Speak of the issue like they're wrong, and that's the only way you're ever going to get them to see that they're wrong.
Yeah. It's such a, not to overuse a word too much here, but that is such an idolatrous thing to say. It's like, I'm going to not call abortion murder because my culture doesn't consider it murder. Your culture is not your God. The Supreme Court is not your God. Yeah. God has said, "Thou shalt not murder." That's written on your heart and every other heart of the people you're going to be talking to. So you can call it with authority murder. Like, you don't have to say, "Oh, it's not murder because our culture doesn't call it murder." That's stupid. Like, that is a stupid thing to do. Yeah. God has said it's murder. You are a Christian. You are his servant. Go out and do his will. Say it. Say what it is. Call things what they are, what they really are, not what your culture is calling it. And that's just another example where Klusendorf, again, has this idol of the Supreme Court, where he treats the Supreme Court as more ultimate than God. Yeah. And so he doesn't. His rhetoric reflects that. It reflects that this court, who has acted wickedly, is of greater importance than the Word of God. And so he's going to orient the way he speaks around that. That shouldn't be the case. It should be, there is a higher law, this is a lower law, this is what's real, this is what's true, this is what's good. Yeah. We're doing evil. It needs to change to this. Not, I'm going to talk like this because that's my culture. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. It's just ridiculous. And that is I would say that's an example. We've been saying a lot of this stuff isn't inherently wicked. I would say that's an example of an inherently a wicked way of thinking about this and communicating about this. Call abortion murder because that's what it is.
Yeah. And not only can we not uphold justice because the Supreme Court says so, we actually can't even speak justly because the Supreme Court says so. It really is crazy. It's a very statist, and we throw that word around a lot, but statism, in the sense that you are making that your God. You're making them your ultimate submission. I will speak as you tell me to speak. I will allow child sacrifice in my state if you say that I should, and I'll encourage my state legislators to submit to you because you tell them what to do, and their unconditional submission is to you too. It's just this crazy submissive to the state always view. It's real bad.
There's a second reason too why it is appealing to pro-life advocates is because when a pro-choice advocate says, well, you can't call it murder because our laws don't treat it as murder, and the definition of murder is the unlawful killing of an innocent human being. The pro-life advocate doesn't like to go to the gospel there. Generally speaking, not all of them, generally speaking though, the pro-life advocate doesn't want to say, you know the law, it's written on your heart, you're an image bearer of God, and so yes, you know that it's murder. They want to be able to argue in completely secular terms, and so if they're going to argue on secular terms, they're not going to be bringing up God. And so it's a good cop-out for them to just change their rhetoric to reflect the culture because they don't want to deal with things that they ought to be dealing with. They don't want to deal on a worldview level. They just want to deal with the one issue of abortion. And they're not thinking about how the gospel relates to abortion, and they're not bringing the gospel into conflict with the evils of our age. They're instead just having this single focus and cutting God out of it as if he has nothing to say about it.
You may find pro-lifers who will speak that way. I mean, I'm sure there are many, many out there. But what you will never find is a pro-life leader who speaks that way. You will never find a pro-life leader speaking in the way that that they need to, that you just talked about. And so this needs to be a gospel issue. You got to keep the main thing. Abortion's got to be murder. It's got to be abolished. And to do that, you've got to actually speak about it like it is murder. Otherwise, we're never going to get to a place where it actually is treated that way.
The other category of things that we frequently see is funding. We already talked about this a little bit, but this is just a particularly ridiculous example from Students for Life. I think it's important to see how using incorrect rhetoric actually warps your thinking. I don't know who made this meme with Students for Life, and I don't want to goof on them too bad. I'm hoping that they're going to maybe they'll see this podcast and they'll think they'll see how silly it is, but
it's hard to talk about this in a way that's appropriate without goofing on it.
It is bad. So the meme, for those who can't see, it's got a portion of a $100 bill, and it says $90, and it says what the chemical abortion costs abortionists. And then it says, with a full $100 bill, and it says $535, and it says what abortionists charge women for the chemical abortion pill. So this is the abortion is too expensive pro-life rhetoric. And this is something I haven't seen really frequently, but it was such a stunning example of bad rhetoric that I had to bring it up.
It's like, if you win here, if you win, you've made abortion more affordable. Congratulations.
This highlights I think we read the Wilberforce quote not too long ago about how this was the best thing. The regulationists were doing the very best thing that they could possibly do to benefit the West Indian slavery company. This is the best thing they could possibly do to help the abortion industry. If they could make it more affordable for abortions, this kind of rhetoric and this kind of regulationism actually makes the abortion industry more deadly. You don't want cheaper abortions. I don't know why you would want to win that argument. But again, this is just another kind of appeal to try to get people to, I guess what the idea here is they're money hungry. They're just trying to make themselves rich off of murdering babies. To a person that doesn't see abortion as murder, why does that matter? That doesn't matter at all. It shouldn't matter. Kristen Hawkins, Abby Johnson, they've made themselves very wealthy off of opposing abortion, right? But that shouldn't necessarily be a means of discrediting them. I think, to me, it's that's really ridiculous that someone makes that much money off of going against opposing abortion, like Abby Johnson making $20,000 every speaking engagement. That's crazy to me. But this so if you're a pro-abortion advocate, that might be a compelling point to some people who support her. This kind of rhetoric is only normalizing abortion. It's only treating it as a product. It's making it something that's like this should be an affordable thing. Like this would help women more if it was less expensive. That's the kind of thought and the heart behind a meme like this. Well, maybe not the heart, but the thought behind a meme like that's what it communicates to me, at least. Is it's a product that needs to be cheaper, and the people are ripping you off. It's like when people are advocating against the big pharmaceutical companies. They're saying they're overcharging us for this kind of thing. Of course, when people are saying that, they're saying pharmaceuticals are a legitimate product, but we're being overcharged, right? In this case, it's like you're treating it just like a product. You're treating it as something that does not involve the murder of a preborn child.
And so, this is just another example. Whatever they're trying to do, right? It's so short-sighted and so unconnected to any actual success in abolishing abortion. In this case, you're actually setting it back, right, by allowing more women to get abortions, making it easier to obtain. Just really, really poor thinking, poor rhetoric, poor argumentation. But these are the experts, right? These are the professionals, who really know what they're doing.
Yeah,
so.
No, I definitely had to include this one. It's just because it's so off base. It's so far away from anything that we should be saying. Yeah. Like, I am not concerned about how much an abortion costs. Like, I could care less. I care about the fact that it's murdering a child. Yeah. If it was legal for someone to hire a hitman and it was $10,000, I really would not be caring about the fee that was involved. I would be caring about the law that allowed for someone to call a hitman out on, people I know or people I don't know, because that's wicked. That's immoral. So, yeah. So this, the next point, and this really comes up when we have, usually it's when we have a big case of some abortionist acting like the serial killer they are and hoarding babies. There's some legislation as well that pro-lifers push where they say that, it would be better if these babies that are murdered from abortion were disposed of in a humane way, like if they were buried or if they were cremated or something like that. And the idea there, to be fair to the pro-lifers, is you're trying to essentially make it really difficult for the abortionist to kill in larger volumes because they have to get rid of the bodies by burying them or by cremating them or something like that.
Yeah, they can't just put them down the sink or down the toilet or something.
Yeah. And the thing is, when they try to drum up outrage for this, it just comes out as really ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. Like, the people who are listening to it, they must think, man, pro-lifers are really wicked, messed up people. Like, they actually think it's murder, but they're mad that they're not burying them properly. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, when the Ulrich Klopfer situation happened, the Indiana abortionist who was keeping 2,200 trophies of the bodies of the children he killed in his house and in his car and stuff. When that came out, there was a lot of outrage. But was it outrage saying abortion's murder? These children were killed unjustly. This practice must be abolished? No, the outrage was this guy took he took corpses across state lines. Mm-hmm. That was the outrage. And I've got some quotes. I wrote an article also in the Federalist about this, and a few quotes from that article. This one, oh my gosh, this was from Judd Deere, who was a spokesman for former President Trump, and he says, murdering thousands of innocent babies is one thing. Murdering thousands of innocent babies is one thing. But preserving and hoarding their bodies like trophies is a whole new level of sickness, right? Yeah. It goes back to the stuff we were talking about from the documentary trailer about how, like, man, he was on the straight and narrow, and then, man, he really took a turn for the bad here when he started doing weird stuff that violated regulations. Yeah. Like, no. It's the murder that's the central thing, not just one thing, and here's extra bad. No, the murder is the thing. Mm-hmm. But there's just this absolute avoidance of ever making the main thing the main thing.
Yeah. Don't do secularism, so kids. It'll mess you up.
Yes.
This is the fruit of a secular worldview for a Christian. It's when a Christian puts on the mind of his culture and does not put on the mind of Christ's. I don't even know if this Judd Deers is a Christian or not, but this is the result of it. Like, the pro-life rhetoric actually is completely buying into what the culture thinks, and it is serving the idol of what the culture thinks, and drumming up outreach according to what the culture will think is bad, but not focusing on what he acts like is a minor point in here. Murdering babies is one thing. Like, so he must be a pro-lifer. It's like, but at least he's willing to use the word murder, but maybe he just doesn't even understand, like, what is coming out of his mouth. It's insane. Like, okay, there's this little point over here, but really you should dispose of the bodies better.
Yeah.
Crazy. It's just insane. And the whole Klopfer situation, we had a lot of people say stuff like this. And we also have a quote here from the Life Chief Legal Officer, Stephen Aden. He said, Klopfer's actions undoubtedly violated Indiana medical laws, but he didn't care, nor did he care that thousands of patients did not give consent to allowing him to take the bodies of the deceased infants across state lines. Oh, gosh. It's not funny, but for an unknown reason. I almost laugh a little bit just because it's so absurd. Like, he's he's focusing on whether or not the patients were given consent to let the bodies of the babies be taken over state lines.
Yeah.
What a stupid concern to have. Like, imagine a bunch of World War II American soldiers happen upon a concentration camp, and they see dead people everywhere, and they smell the disease and the decay, and some soldier says, it doesn't look like they've been feeding them properly, and I don't know if they, like, that's the kind of concern that he brings up, or it doesn't look like they have proper sanitation here. Like, people,
these gas chambers are real grimy.
Yeah.
What's up with that? Let's get some regulations on gas chambers.
Yeah, this cannot be up to code.
Yeah.
Like, how would you have that kind of reaction in seeing that? And of course, in this case, it was a shock to them that this was even happening. Yeah. But abortion should be shocking to you when you know that it's happening.
Yeah.
That's what you should be inducing into the culture. You should be getting them to be shocked about it. You should make them angry about it. But when you act like the regulations are the important thing, you actually make abortion normal. You make it something that is not actually bad, and it plays into the whole idea that it's healthcare.
Right.
And that's all it is.
And that's exactly why the Attorney General of Illinois got involved, who was a Democrat, a hardcore pro-abort. His name, I believe, was Kwame Raoul. And he was on board with all the investigations into if Klopfer was breaking laws, because Klopfer was a PR liability for pro-aborts. Yeah. And so they had to demonize Ulrich Klopfer to make the rest of the abortionists look normal and good. And so, again, if you were a pro-choicer thinking, man, what is the perfect statement on Ulrich Klopfer? It would be, abortion is one thing, and then this is something completely different entirely that's unacceptable. That's pro-abortion. Mm-hmm. That is not anything that will ever lead to justice being achieved.
And I'm sure a lot of pro-lifers saw the support of, what was his name?
Kwame Raoul.
Yeah, I'm sure they saw that as like a victory almost. It's like, oh, this pro-abortion guy is in with our for our regulations.
Well, let's put him on stage at March for Life.
Yeah,
let's make documentaries about this guy.
Well, and it reminds me of just a lot of apologetics discussions. Like there's people, a lot of times people count it as a victory when somebody goes from an atheist to a theist. Like, to me, I don't care about that. Like, being a theist is not going to save you. You are saved by faith alone, by grace alone, through the blood of Christ alone. Like, that is the only way that someone's going to be saved, and that's the victory. And so it just reminds me of just wrong goals. It's like you're trying to like have this sort of piecemeal approach where you're convincing people little bit by little bit to accept that abortion is murder. But the thing that you're getting them in with is just accepting the premise they already accept, that restrictions on what they believe is a legitimate medical practice should be enacted. So that's not a victory. Like, you're not getting victory unless you're actually getting them to buy into the whole thing, that abortion is murder because it is violating an image bearer of God, and it should be abolished and criminalized because that's just. Like, that's what you want the culture to believe. But they're satisfied with even things like that, I'm sure. I'm sure there's people that were just like giddy that a radical pro-abortion Democrat was supportive of their restrictions.
And lest anyone think that's unfair, again, let me remind you of the Gosnell documentary called 3801 Lancaster, where they put a bunch of pro-aborts in front of camera and said, yeah, I support abortion, but this is crazy that this was allowed, right? And so it's not unfair to say that they would do something like that, right? Kwame Arul legitimately wanted, the abortionists to follow the law so that abortion looks sanitary and normal and, approved by the law. And so that's what pro-aborts want, and pro-lifers play right into their game. Accept all the premises and even prop up their advocates if the advocates think that abortion should be, safe, legal, and rare. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Really, really crazy. It's so short-sighted, but it's not even short-sighted in a way that, being short-sighted can be tempting, but it's such a stupid, unbelievably, obviously stupid short-sightedness. It's man, how does anyone fall for this? How is this what the pro-lifers are doing? It's really, really, I don't know. I'm not asking that I'm about to answer. I don't know. It's just so stupid. I just don't know how people can buy into this as a good strategy. But
it's fear of man, I would say. That's a big part of it. You're especially with people that disagree so profoundly, they're just thinking of ways that they're not going to take heat from the culture, I think, in a lot of circumstances. Yeah. And then they're just orienting their rhetoric so that they can appear less radical or less insane to the culture. Right. When they should just be saying, appear insane for a while so that your preborn neighbors will not continue to be killed. That's how change happens. You get people who appear to the culture to be insane, and they're hated by their culture. They're persecuted by their culture. Yep. And over time, the thing is done away with because of those people, not because of these people who are just making this soft rhetoric that's not actually moving anything anywhere. It's not changing someone's mind. It's not causing them to repent. And it's giving no call for repentance. There's no opportunity for anything like that.
Yeah, so on the topic of not wanting to say anything that's going to offend the culture and wanting to appeal to people where they are because you're afraid of man, the pro-lifers do not, the last thing in the world that they want is for anyone to think that they think a woman should ever face penalties under the law for having their own child killed. And so I was talking to a pro-lifer for a good while. This was about 2 years ago, and I was in conversation with a fairly big name pro-lifer it was over months. I'm talking to her about abolition, and I wrote an article about some stuff that she was doing. I thought I was getting somewhere in terms of converting her, to the abolitionist cause. And then one day, she just reverted all the way back to the beginning, where I thought she was coming along, but it became apparent then that she wasn't. And what she said to me was, she says, I do not support legislation that criminalizes a woman for having an abortion performed on her. Now, that's interesting. Performed on her.
Yeah. It's it's something that happens to you, not a crime that you commit.
Right. It was not of the woman's own volition. She was just, going about her day, and all of a sudden some abortionist, yanked her into the clinic and, murdered her baby and took her money by force. Yeah. Right.
It's a bit like the people who talk about, what if I accidentally get a girl pregnant or something like that? Yeah, it's not going to happen on accident, guy. I think what you were doing. It's the same type of rhetoric. It's what if this thing happens to me? You mean, what if you fornicate with someone and get them pregnant? It's the same type of thing. Abortion was performed on her. Yeah. This is something that's happening to you. It's not something you're doing.
Yeah. There was no act of sin involved. This is just, she's a victim. This stuff happens to her. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I do not support legislation that criminalizes a woman for having an abortion performed on her. I don't think that is the way to empower women to choose life.
Yeah.
Empower women to choose life is what it's about in her mind. That's what being pro-life is about. It's not about, justice. It's not about abolition. It's about empowering women to choose life. And if abolishing a bill to abolish abortion gets in the way of that, I'm not going to support it, because the first thing for me is empowering women to choose life. The first thing for me is vague, catchphrases that'll, go over well with the culture.
Yeah.
And the sinful state that the culture's in.
And again, the comparison, I'm sure, is worn out by now, but it's I'm not for legislation that criminalizes the rapist. I would prefer that men were empowered to not rape. No, you're stupid. That's so dumb. To put it in the exact terms that she uses, I do not support legislation that criminalizes a man for having an rape performed on his victim. I don't think that is the way to empower men to choose not rape. really ridiculous. And it's not funny, but it is kind of funny how ridiculous this is. It's so dumb. Like, this is not something that's happening to you. Otherwise, and people like this will readily admit, there is guilt after abortion, right? Where does that guilt come from? From the knowledge that it's killing a human being. And the resistance to saying that criminalization is something that should happen, it would be an interesting exercise if a pro-life organization, every single one, drafted their ideal situation for the law. Because I think in a lot of cases, you'll have pro-lifers who say things like they think that it's going to be criminalized eventually down the road at some point. Like Josh Brom says that. But they're not for it right now. They want like 50 years of whatever they're asking for at the moment, like punishing doctors. Yeah. And then over time, eventually it will become illegal once people are educated out of all of that. It's almost like asking for Jim Crow after slavery. Like we're aiming for Jim Crow after slavery, and then eventually we'll come out of that. Yeah. No, you want the whole thing. You want racism to end. In this case, you want ageism to end. You want criminalization. But for whatever reason, they're looking at it as though they have to go through all these flawed, stupid steps. And I don't know, maybe she does truly think that criminalization is wrong and like it shouldn't ever happen. But I think a lot of these pro-lifers, they'll say this kind of thing because they're trying to appeal to a certain group of people that they know, like post-abortive women or post-abortive men or whatever it is. But in the back of their mind, they're thinking, I want it criminalized. Like that's what a lot of the pro-life leaders have said in sort of closed door things and things that are not as publicized. But they don't want to be blasting that kind of thing out there because they're trying to appeal to a culture that is wicked, that doesn't want punishment for their sin. And so this last example, and then we're going to wrap up the show. It's been a little bit of a long one here, but this one is even the pro-life movement's rhetoric that they have, which is already bad. Like their name is bad. It's very weak. It's not actually pointing to the evilness of abortion. It's not stating any intent of what they want to do with it. Even that term pro-life, they tend to water it down
even more.
Even more. Like, yeah. And this is a good example from Abby Johnson. This is her official page. Just to get that fully in it.
This is an all-time classic right here.
Yeah. Scroll up just a tiny bit there. And this is from an article that James wrote if you're interested in it. It's a really good read. But Abby Johnson is responding to why she doesn't support the criminalization of abortion in Texas. And she says, do you understand what happens if a state decides to defy the federal government? No money to education, no more Medicaid for children or medically fragile children. Many hospitals would close, no military or disaster relief. Many, many people would be out of work. How is that a pro-life response? And then she says, these people in the abolitionist movement have absolutely zero concept of what pro-life legislation looks like. Okay, so yes, we don't care what your pro-life legislation is. We reject that. We don't want to be a part of that. It's secular and it's secularly minded. It's not based on the word of God. But what she's doing to her own terminology, as far as what she does to the power of her own rhetoric, is makes being pro-life about a certain set of state funding things, like whether or not you're being funded for Medicare, or whether you're being funded for your roads or whatever it is. And essentially what that does is just says, I'm not willing to sacrifice it all if abortion if we defy as a state and we make abortion illegal. Like I don't want people in our state who are born to suffer for the preborn. And it should be, yes, I am perfectly willing for my state to be cut off of Medicaid funding, to be cut off of all this different funding, if it means my preborn neighbor is no longer being brutally murdered. That is the Christian thing to say. Maybe Abby's right, and that's not the pro-life thing to say, but that's the Christian thing to say.
Yeah.
And so they dumb down and they water down their own rhetoric, and they complain about it too. They say, "Oh, you're making pro-life about everything. We shouldn't have to deal with everything. We shouldn't have to deal with the poor. We shouldn't have to deal with all these other things." And you pro-choicers are always saying we're not pro-life, we're not doing this. But then you do it to yourselves when you say it's not pro-life to criminalize because we're going to lose our funding, because that's not a pro-life thing to do.
Yeah. Well, before even we get to the evil part of it, there's like a economic, ignorance here that Texas gives a lot more to the federal government than they get, and so that wouldn't be a bad thing if there were an economic war between Texas and DC. Texas could win that war. It's one of the few states that really could win that war. But even assuming that this would be economically devastating to Texas, even assuming that, the idea that you're going to value that more than abolition. I mean, this isn't one of the examples, as there have been many in this episode, that are just wrong thinking. This is evil. This is unimaginably wicked. Like, this is so evil, it's insane. And she's just outright saying it. I value federal funding more than justice for preborn children, more than protecting preborn children under the law. This is not a mistaken thinking. This is something is wrong deep, deep, deep in the way that Abby Johnson addresses the abortion issue. And then, rhetorically, like you said, you are making your term, your movement's identity to mean nothing. If it means everything, it means nothing. And that's what, there are pro-lifers who will, like you said, complain that pro-choicers, say, well, how many children have you adopted? Or why don't you care about all the children, in cages at the border and all that sort of stuff? No, it's pro-lifers who do this to themselves. It's to go after pro-lifers like Abby Johnson for doing it. Rhetorically is incredibly foolish. I mean, there's so much. There's economic ignorance, just like rhetorical and like political complete lack of wisdom, and then just on top of wickedness. I mean, just stupidity on top of stupidity on top of sin. Man, really good synopsis of everything wrong with the way Abby Johnson's doing this in the pro-life movement. Yeah,
and alternatively, it's really, really difficult to to water down the rhetoric of a abortion abolitionist. It's really clear what we want. Like, that's the thing we're focusing on. That is the main thing that we are trying to get the legislature to do, to repent of their sin of apathy towards legalized child sacrifice in our country and to abolish it. But when you label yourself with such weak terms, you shouldn't be surprised when they get watered down, and you really shouldn't be surprised when you're the one watering it down. So that has been our show, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to do a drawing this week, but because Russell's not here, we thought it more appropriate to allow him to be the one to give away his own art, just because that seems like the right thing to do. And so we're going to post a different video about the drawing for a drawing this month. Sorry, not this week. But make sure you like our YouTube page, or you subscribe to our YouTube page, like this video, share it, get this to as many people as you possibly can, because language is really important. Like, we need to be a movement that is specific about what we want, and we need to be one that is biblical in our rhetoric and one that is precise. The pro-life movement isn't. They're very lazy about it. They buy into false presuppositions, and we don't want to be like that. And so if we want to see abortion abolished, we really need to focus on making sure we are being accurate in the things that we're saying, and that we're not making tangential things that don't have to do with the actual evil that we're fighting far more prominent than the evil itself. We want to hold up abortion for the culture to see, so that they would have opportunity to repent of it, and we want to call them to that repentance.
Yep. So the artwork this month is really, really cool. Russell has spent a lot of time with this Wilberforce art. It's going to be on T-shirts, it's going to be on drop cards, and it's part of a larger project that we're doing to really just do away with this myth once and for all that Wilberforce was somehow a gradualist. Despite everything he ever said on the topic, the pro-lifers still want to claim Wilberforce, would be on their side, and we're really Russell's going to do a really, really good job of putting that myth not even to bed, deep in the grave. That myth will be dead, and it's never going to be able to come back. And so it's going to be really good. That video will come out soon. We're going to draw from this bowl, one of our donors. And so if you want to get your name in this bowl, win the next piece of art that we're giving away next month, go to freethestates.org/donate, become a monthly member of at least $25, and your name will go in the bowl, and you could win some art. And you'll be supporting us to make podcasts like this, and artwork like what Russell's drawing, and to lobby for bills of abolition, and create educational content and pamphlets and all this stuff that we're doing. And so please go do that for us, and do it to possibly win some art. So,
Thanks for joining us.